Welcome to another edition of Community Matters. I am your host, Jim Cameron, Program Director of Darien TV 79. And this is a program where we talk about the parts of Darien that make it so very special. Some of the non-government organizations that help make Darien such a great place to live. And there's probably none more frequently visited or more important to our community than our library. Kiera Parrott is our guest today on the program. She is the director of the library, and we're going to talk about all things library today. Kiera, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jim. I'm delighted to be here. And thank you and all the folks at TV 79 for the great work that you do. It's a real pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about your background. I see that you actually came back to Darien Library. But let's talk about your professional education. You have an MLIS. What is an MLIS?
That is right. It stands for a Master's of Library and Information Science. A lot of folks don't necessarily know that professional librarians do go to graduate school. We go and get our master's degree, and sometimes it's called an MLS, Master's of Library Science. More recently, in the last 20 years or so, they've added that information. So it's Library and Information Services. And yes, I started my career, and most of it has been in public libraries about 17 years ago. In fact, my very first real job when I got my working papers at age 14 was as a page at the Bayside branch of the Queensboro Public Library in Queens, New York. So I fell in love early and very fast, and it's been a lifelong passion and love affair. I worked for New York Public Library for quite a while, and an institution that is very near and dear to my heart. Least of all because it's also where I met my husband, who is also a librarian.
Really? So you keep it in the family, I guess.
That's right. That's right. A lot of books and a lot of book discussions in our home.
Talk about the Dewey Decimal System over dinner, or
raging debates over Dewey Decimal. And then, yes, as you mentioned, this is not my first time at Darien Library. In 2008. I had the absolute pleasure to come aboard in the old library a little briefly before the Leroy Avenue building closed as a children's librarian and collection specialist there. And I think I was just so fortunate because I really got the opportunity to experience the charm of the old library, which it was a lovely, very cozy, very charming building, but also the excitement and the thrill of the preparations for this building and the grand opening. So I was here for all of that and really fortunate.
Do you know the history of the library in Darien, when Darien got its first library and where that was?
Yes, so the library was first established in 1894. Some folks might be familiar with that year because we celebrate our founding every year, 1894 Day here at the library. And it truly is this remarkable story of love, perseverance, and as our one of our former directors, Louise Berry, called it, a Yankee passion, which it really is emblematic of that. It was citizens here in town. Led by George Platt Brett Sr. and Annis Brady. They're sort of known as the mother and father, founders of the library in 1894. And it began as a one-room library in their house, in one of their homes along the Post Road. And the library actually moved multiple times. It moved 6 different times in its history. And with the exception of Leroy Avenue, it was up and down the Post Road until we finally found our forever home here at 1441 in 2009. And one of my favorite side stories about the early founding of the library is there were several attempts to start a library and get one going prior to 1894, and they didn't really go anywhere. But one of my favorite stories was Andrew Carnegie actually came to Darien. And he made an offer. He said, I will grant the town of Darien $10,000 to build a new library, a library for the town, a Carnegie building. And the town said no. They said, Andy, keep your money. We don't want it. We're going to do this on our own, which, it took them a little longer, but they eventually did. So,
well, Carnegie built a lot of libraries across the country, didn't he?
Very much so, and a lot in the tri-state area. A lot of New York public libraries are Carnegie buildings. Many of them very beautiful. But I just love, it's very emblematic of Darien and sort of that pride and passion of, we're going to do this our way and we're going to do it on our own steam. We're going to do it ourselves. Thank you very much.
So the current building that you're in now, was, as you say, opened in 2009. Tell us a little bit about how it came to be and what makes it so special. It's a very green building, is it not?
Yes. So this building was funded and built over a 3-year capital campaign. And it was at the time, and I want to say actually holds the record potentially today for being the largest fundraising campaign ever in the town's history. We had over 1,800 individual families contribute to the campaign and the development. So this was all, really, once again, that Yankee passion, that Darien citizens who really understood that, having a vibrant, tech up-to-date building with beautiful spaces for meeting, for quiet study, is so important to the health and vibrancy of a community. It was built by Peter Gisolfi, the architect, and very intentional in the design. I mean, it has a very classic New England style, the red brick, a lot of the slate roof, all these beautiful classic elements, but also infused with a lot of modern elements, including tons of windows, lots of light and air, a lot of technology infused throughout the building in a sort of seamless way. And it is a LEED certified green building, and was actually the very first library in the state of Connecticut to get that certification and designation. We have about 54,000 square feet. And like I said, it's a mix of these areas that bring people together, like our beautiful community room that seats almost 200, where you can have large events, auditorium style. We have smaller meeting rooms and conference rooms if you need to meet with a smaller group of people or do a book discussion. We have our grand reading room. A lot of people call it the Hogwarts Room, with beautiful long mahogany tables where you can get work and quiet study done and really concentrate. Our bustling first floor that we call Main Street, with the cafe and all of the new books, and of course the children's library, which is always a buzz with activity. So we are, very fortunate to enjoy such a beautiful facility.
And the building is heated and cooled using underground technology. Is that right?
That's right. We have a geothermal system that helps heat and cool the building using the underground system that's keeps us keeping that LEED certification. So it was one of the elements that helped us achieve that LEED certification.
And the building itself is more than just a collection of books, as you say. But let's talk about some of the numbers, because we think library and we think books, obviously. How many books are there in the Darien Library these days?
So physical items, we have over 200,000, physical items, books on the shelves that you can check out. You add another, at least 20,000, audiobooks and DVDs to that. But when you look at our digital collections, this is sort of, the bigger picture. When you add in all of the ebooks, audio books, digital materials, we're talking something like 1.2 million items that are available to anyone with the Darien Library card, which is pretty incredible. Something we also circulate are items. We circulate technology. So we have digital projectors and screens that you could check out. We have air quality testing kits that you can check out from the library. We call these the library of things. So items that people may not want to purchase, but you're going to use occasionally. Chances are we might have something like that you can check out and circulate from the public library.
So the library itself, and our guest today on the program, by the way, is Kiera Parrott. If you don't recognize her, she's the director of the Darien Library. The building itself was built all with donated money. Is that correct?
That's right. There was the sale of the Leroy Avenue, the old building location. The library sold that back to the town of Darien, which of course is now the site of the Board of Ed offices. So that did help with the sale of that building, but the primary fundraising was all through donors, friends of the library who brought it together for this building.
But the town also has you in its budget annually. What does the town pay for in terms of the operation of the library?
Yes, we enjoy a very unique and strong, what we call the public-private partnership that we have with the town of Darien. So the town, through the Board of Selectmen's annual operating budget, we are awarded a grant that is part of their budget, which covers about 75% of our total annual operating expenses. And that is staffing and benefits, any organization's, largest part of their budget, as well as core building operations and maintenance. So these are things like the utilities, the lights in the place, and annual regular maintenance and upkeep of the building itself. So that's what the town of Darien and taxpayers are funding. And then everything else, that remaining 25%, which is everything else. So all of the books, all of the DVDs, all of the digital collections and databases, all of the programming and events that we put on, all of the technology, the computers and other technology in the building and throughout the building, all of that gets funded through Friends of the Library, through private donations every year, through our fundraising events that we do and our annual campaign.
So the Friends of the Library are not just a handful of people who are friends, but it's actually an organization. Talk to us a little bit about the official quotes, Friends of the Library.
Yeah, so anyone who donates to Darien Library is a friend. So if you've ever made a donation to Darien Library, we thank you. We consider you our friend. But our board of trustees are actually the Friends of the Library official organization, and they help govern and oversee both our fundraising, high-level policy decision-making and capital projects. So in addition to the annual operating, that 25%, the books, the materials, the programs and technology, anytime the library needs capital improvements, upgrades, renovations of a capital nature, that is also something that we rely on the Friends for. And every year we have our annual meeting where we invite all of our friends of the library to come and hear about what we're doing, how their fundraising dollars are being put to work, and what's on the horizon and where we'd like to go and really get their input. What would you like to see us be doing, and how would you like the library to be better supporting you in the community? I think that has really been the hallmark of the success of Darien Library over the years, is that we've been responsive to the adaptations and evolution of this community that doesn't stand still. I mean, Darien is a fast-paced town, has its finger on the pulse of changes that are happening, and we want to be not just keeping up with that, but ever so slightly ahead if we can. Certainly when it comes to technology and some of the programs and educational and cultural enrichment that we offer, we really want to be ever so slightly ahead. So you look to the library as that place where you can, learn something new, develop a new skill, as well as, meet your friends and neighbors and come together.
You mentioned your board of trustees. Who's on the board of trustees and who elects them?
So we have about 17 members on our board of trustees. Our current president is Malin Gesserud, and we have an executive committee. We have various committees on the board that oversee everything from art, some of the art gallery programs we have here, to obviously development and fundraising and so on. And they are elected actually every year at our annual meeting, which this year is Sunday, September 18th. And that is a meeting that anyone in the community is actually welcome to attend, not just friends, not just board members. We gather here, and if you're interested in hearing about the library and hearing about the new trustees who will be voted upon, that'll also happen at that event. So all members of Friends, anyone who's ever donated to Darien Library, actually gets a vote. So if you come to that meeting and you've been a donor at any point, you can vote on the trustees and the officers.
Let's talk a little bit about your staffing, because the building is green. There's a lot of books and DVDs and everything else going on, but you need people to help bring the patrons and the collection together. So talk about your library staff.
Yeah, I mean, the staff, that's really the heart and soul of Darien Library are the people who work here. We really pride ourselves on kindness and compassion and being a welcoming place. And, no matter where you walk in the building, whether you stop by the welcome desk, we have our readers advisors, obviously our children's library and teen services. You can go upstairs and see Blanche and Brittany up on the reference desk, or Maria and Jose on our help desk. We have staff who are poised to welcome you, greet you, and find whatever it is you need, whether you're looking for that latest book that somebody in your book club mentioned, whether you need help with the Bloomberg terminal and you're doing some financial research for the first time, or you're a college kid who just needs a study room because you got to get on a Zoom call or you have an interview or something like that. And our staff we have about 60 staffers altogether, a little under half of whom are full-time and the rest are part-time. And some of our librarians, like myself, are professional librarians with an MLIS or an MLS who have a master's degrees. Others are specialists in other skill sets. So, for example, at our welcome desk, we have our readers advisors, and these are individuals who reading is their passion. And if you are looking for a great recommendation, your next great read for yourself or your book club, I mean, no one does it better than, folks like Pat and Virginia and Jill and Colleen and Ann. All of our readers advisor staff are just absolutely amazing. And some of them have specialties. So, if you're looking specifically for Irish mysteries, we have a staff member for that. If you're looking for biographies, we may have a different person we're going to have you talk to. So, I think what attracted me to Darien Library when I first came here was the culture, the internal culture, and the way that when anyone comes through the door, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what you look like, you're going to get a smile, you're going to get a welcome. And one of the things that really resonated with me was after we fully reopened the building, after it had been closed and then sort of staggered services during the height of COVID, when we fully reopened and people could walk back into the building and spend some time here, we had patrons with tears in their eyes who came up to us and said, "Oh my gosh, I've missed you so much." And what really stuck out to me and was so poignant was not just the building. Yes, they missed the library. They missed being here and browsing for books and sitting at the tables and all of that. But so many of them said, "I miss talking with the librarians. I miss chatting with Virginia. I miss, saying hi to Blanche upstairs." And I think that really speaks to the part of our mission that talks about community building. Because we are not just, as you said, a building filled with books. I mean, yes, we have great books. Come here and get some great books, but we are also part of this community and have relationships with our patrons and our community members that extend over decades and are really powerful.
You mentioned Louise Berry, who was the director for many, many years. And she is, I think, well known in the whole library industry as setting a different tone of service. Could you talk a little bit about that philosophy?
Yeah, Louise Berry, I feel very privileged that I was able to work with her when I was first hired here. She's an icon. She's a legend. And I remember talking with Ann Mandel, who's one of our honorary trustees, and she was actually on the board and was part of, hiring Louise when Louise was a young librarian taking on the role of director. And Ann said, at the time, prior to Louise's directorship, the library had this, this unofficial philosophy of books in, people out. This idea that, the librarians are here to somehow protect the books and patrons are sort of the enemy. We got to be careful and not let them do too much. You think about the libraries of old where you get shushed, the mean librarian behind the desk, shushing everyone and, being sort of that enforcing presence. And Louise came in like a breath of fresh air and said, no, we are going to flip this completely on its head. And she developed this philosophy called extreme customer service. And that has remained really an ethos. These days, we sort of call that kindness first, like when we are training our staff and we say, you need to you're in a position where you need to make a decision. A patron asks you to do something, and maybe, you're faced with, oh, well, our policy is X, but they're asking me to do Y. What I learned from Louise is you will never, ever get in trouble if you make a decision out of kindness. If you make a decision that's going to make that person's day a little better, if you're going to, walk out with them to the parking lot and bring their books out, or, get them a book from the local bookstore, or order it so they can get it immediately, and then we'll add it to the collection later on because, something happened and they couldn't get their book on time. These are decisions that in a larger, more bureaucratic institution, it would just be a no. We don't do that. Our policy is this. Sorry, we can't. If you're lucky, you'll get a sorry at some institutions. And really, our philosophy remains that, it's not our library. It's the community's library. We are here to serve. And if you want to work here, you gotta love people. Yes, you should maybe love books and reading and learning and literature, and that's great. But really, it's a people job. And at the end of the day, if you don't love people and working with people and helping them, this is not the place for you. And that's okay. It's not for everyone. But if you love individuals and you love being in a helping profession, you're going to be really happy here.
Kiera Parrott is our guest today on Community Matters. She is the director of the Darien Library. One of the examples that I often think of when I think of that extreme customer service is, you go into the library and maybe you go over to the computer and you look up a book and you jot down the Dewey Decimal number for it. Now there's a map that says, okay, it's on the second floor. It's not like a treasure hunt. But if you go over to a librarian at the Darien Library and say, I'm looking for book X, they'll not only look up that book for you, they will walk you to where the book is located.
That is exactly
help you
right.
find it.
Yep, we do not point. That's one thing that we train our employees on. A lot of institutions and places that you'll go, you get somebody in a desk, type. Oh yeah, third floor, that way. And that's the end of your interaction. So again, it comes down at the core to kindness. How would you want to be treated? How would you want your mom to be treated, or your sister, and then, what happens is a little bit of magic sometimes in the walk up the stairs or down the corner and around to the shelf. That's when you actually get to know people. Oh, so what brings you into the library today? Oh, I haven't seen you in a while. Didn't you just have a grandchild? Oh, tell me about your vacation. And that is where you really establish those relationships and connections is in that space between the interactions. And so I don't know, I think it's magical. And that's really where the good stuff happens.
Full disclosure, another service that I use quite frequently at the library, because I'm looking for really obscure books, is something called Interlibrary Loan. And when I talk to Blanche, who's up there in the reference desk, she is my liaison to libraries across the state. Tell me a little about for our viewers' benefit, I know, but tell them about Interlibrary Loan, what that is.
Yeah, so talk about magical. Interlibrary Loan is something that exists in almost every public library in the country. And you can, as a public library, we participate in the Interlibrary Loan system. It is often overseen and organized by the state library, which it is here in Connecticut. And that means that if your hometown library does not have a work, it might be obscure, it might be something that's only in a university library or an archive. If your library subscribes to the Interlibrary Loan system and participates, we have the ability to search all the other libraries in our network in the state of Connecticut and say, oh, you know what, it's at Stores, or, oh, Yale has it at their library. And we can request it, and the librarians over in the other institution will mail it through the interlibrary system to your home library, and you can pick it up and take it out just like you would a hold, and then bring it back. And it is pretty amazing, especially for researchers. We have a lot of genealogists who request special books through that service as well. And it is pretty great.
It's great. And it's free.
Right.
Like everything else at the library. You mentioned adding new books. How do you decide, with all the books that are being published, how do you decide which ones to purchase? Do you pay full freight? Do you get them through Amazon? Do you get a discount? How many copies do you decide to buy of a particular book?
This is all library science, and I love it. So first, the real answer is we have a really amazing team here. We have librarians on our staff who are collection development specialists. So not only do they have a background in library science generally, but they're specialists in exactly what you're talking, collection development, often for specific demographics. So we have a collection specialist just for children's and youth materials. That's her background. So she's thinking not just about newest and hottest and popularity, yes, but also developmental appropriateness. And sometimes like, what are the schools doing, and how we are not a school library, but how do we connect and support maybe what's happening in the learning? We have collection specialists just on nonfiction, and some of our team have, within nonfiction, specific specialties, history versus, cooking and gardening, let's say, and then fiction, of course, and the different genres there. We primarily work through library vendors. So we do get a discount. We try not to pay full price. So we work with vendors like Baker and Taylor and Overdrive and these companies that are made for public libraries. And we get a discount too in terms of our staffing model and the production work, because a lot of our materials come shelf ready, meaning they have the barcodes and the Mylar covers and all of the stickers and identifying library features. So when they arrive, they can be put right on the shelf and get ready for the patrons who want them. It's tricky in terms of what to buy and how many, because the challenge is we have only so many shelves, only so much display and shelf space, and there's so much being published. It's so funny because every few years you get these think pieces in the Times or wherever saying, is the physical book going the way of the dinosaur? Do people even read anymore? And, I always laugh when I see that, because, books are coming out faster and more furious than ever. And especially here in Darien, we have a population of voracious readers, as I know because you're one of them. So I think we try to balance, give them what they want. So the popular books, the big name authors, the New York Times bestsellers, we got to have them, and we're going to have a lot of copies, because when that book hits its street date, it's Tuesday, everyone's waiting for it. We don't want people waiting on hold for weeks and weeks and weeks. We try to get as many copies as we can within our budget parameters. But the trick is we also want to serve as a discovery place for readers, because it may not be a New York Times bestseller, but there may be this smaller publication, this debut author, this wonderful work that maybe you're only going to find at Darien Library, and maybe you see it on display because one of our librarians recommended it and loved it. So we try to balance those two competing forces. COVID has made that a little tricky. Things are starting to get better, but one of the supply chain issues during COVID was publishing. And it came from all sides. I mean, there were paper shortages because a lot of the paper that the publishers use comes from China. There were major shipping delays and all sorts of things happening on that end of the supply chain. And then worker shortages across the country. So warehouse workers who pull the books, prep them, ship them out to libraries. They lost a huge number of their workforce. And so there were major delays. So if you noticed last year, I've been on hold a long time for this book. I don't know why I'm still waiting for it. Where is it? Usually the Darien Library is a little faster. You're not wrong. And it's because of all those sort of factors coming together in a perfect storm. But things are looking better, and we're starting to get our materials a lot faster now that things are evening out.
But when you get new books in, you also cull the collection and you take some books out. How do you decide what books to take off the shelf and what happens to them?
Yeah, so we call this in the library world deaccessioning or weeding. And I love weeding because you think of a garden, right? And if you want your garden to be healthy and thriving, you got to get in there and pull out the weeds and sometimes trim things back. And that's sort of the approach overall. So it kind of depends on the type of book. So information that has an expiration date. So you want to look at medical books, health, sometimes legal information, anything that's going to update and change every few years. We actually keep a schedule, or our librarians, I should say, keep a schedule of those types of books that need to be evaluated every year, every 2 years, maybe every 5 to 8 years, and then look through, is this information still accurate? because we have a responsibility. If we're going to put something on the shelf, it needs to be the very best information, especially nonfiction information. For fiction, that's more of a numbers analysis. We look and say, we think of it as real estate. You're sitting on the shelf book, you got to work for that space. So, if you haven't been checked out and no one's been looking at you for a certain amount of time, we run reports really every month, but definitely every 6 months and year. And if a book has not been going out, it goes on the chopping block and we reconsider. It doesn't mean it immediately goes out the door. We might give it another chance. We might put it on display. We might put it in a newsletter and say, hey, let's recommend this. It actually is wonderful. Maybe if we give it a little marketing push, it'll go out. But if all fails, we make room for something new and fresh that might be more of interest to the community. Most of our books that we deaccession, that we weed from the collection, some of them go back to the vendor. They have a recycling program. We had for many years been sending to an organization called Better World Books, where all of the books find homes, whether it's here in our country or internationally, to in-need libraries. And the program we're using now is very similar. They find good condition books, that homes in libraries or schools or communities that are underserved and need them. Books that are not in great condition and are falling apart, which is another reason we might weed a book. It's seen better days and we have to replace it. Those get recycled.
Do you have any relationship with Darien Book Aid, which has been around for almost 100 years now, I think? No, maybe. Well, since the Cold War, at least. I think that's how they got started.
Yes. And we were sending, I think, a fair bit on a regular basis to them. I know that some of their operations were scaled back during COVID, so things kind of took a back seat, but we're looking forward to partnering with them again. Yes.
And you also hold a sale every year. And those are books that you're deaccessioning, weeding out of the collection, and you sell them at rock bottom prices. How many do you sell and where does the money go from that?
Yeah, so we haven't done that in a while. We used to have an annual book sale, just as you're describing, and they would be, $1. And then the very last day of the book sale, you could fill a whole tote bag for $1 of mostly, weeded materials. We haven't done that in a while. We scaled back, but it's something we're thinking about doing again, because we know the community often asks, library books are always beloved, even if they're weeded from the collection. So the money from events like that would be considered like any of our fundraising events. It goes right back into what we call the Friends budget, which funds more books, new books and materials and programs and events and all of those things. So goes right back into that 25% of our annual operating budget.
So everything in your collection has an RFID chip somewhere in the back of the book, on the back of the DVD, etc., which makes checking books and items out very easy. You just scan them, it knows them, it puts them on your library card. Is my record of using books from the library kept private? Can somebody go and say, Ms. Parrott, I want to see what Mr. Cameron has been reading. You have a complete list of everything he's checked out. Please share that with me.
Right. So no, we as librarians take privacy extremely seriously. And in fact, there were several court cases in the early 2000s after the Patriot Act and some of the things that were happening at the governmental level during that time period, where librarians actually went to court over the very thing you're talking about and the right of patrons to have privacy around what they're checking out from the public library. So no, if someone were to call and say, yeah, I want to know everything Jim's ever checked out, even if a member of law enforcement, let's say, were to call, we would actually need a warrant to release that information, because we really do protect your privacy at the library. Now, we do give the option for patrons to keep a history. Now, some patrons want a history of what they've checked out because they want to log on to the website and say, what was that book I read last September for my book club? I'd like to see it. This is opt-in. And if you don't want to have that history saved, you don't have to. People can opt out of that. But the only people who can access it and see it are either librarians who have the access. And again, we are stalwart defenders of that privacy, or you and anyone you've given your password to. But we take that quite seriously.
Kiera Parrott joining us on Community Matters today. She's the director of the Darien Library. In some communities across Connecticut, there have been efforts by concerned parents and others worried about the content of some of the books that are either in their schools or on their library shelves. Have you had any pressure to remove books from the collection in the Darien Library?
I can say no, and I feel fortunate that we haven't had that situation here, although I do have colleagues in other libraries around the country who have faced not just pressure to remove books, but have received personal threats and intimidation because of their collections. And our perspective and our policy here at the library is we are for everyone, right? We are a public library, and one of our core values as a public library is intellectual freedom. The idea that ideas and information and access to a variety of different perspectives, including maybe even controversial ones, is important to the health and functioning of a democracy and certainly of a community. And yes, there are definitely materials in the public library and here at Darien that some parents may not feel is appropriate for their children. And, to that, our answer is we respect your right as a parent to determine what is and isn't right for your child. If you do not want your child to check out that book or DVD, we are going to respect that. But we don't act in loco parentis. It really is the responsibility of the parent or guardian to make those decisions and to sort of keep an eye on what their kids are checking out and looking at in the public library. Like I said, we do have a collection specialist for the children's library, who chooses the books that are developmentally appropriate and puts them in the right section. But at the end of the day, caregivers and parents need to make those determinations. And I think that's those are the people who should, right? The librarian should decide what your child is reading. You should decide that. But we're going to make it available because what is, maybe a little too much for one child, maybe just the right book or information for another family. Who actually is looking for that detail.
And in addition to the books that you keep on your shelf, you also allow your patrons to use services like Libby and Hoopla. Could you talk to us about those?
Yeah, so the public libraries have had e-collections, digital e-books and e-audio and all these things for quite a while now, at least a decade. But one of the silver linings, if you can call it that, of COVID was a lot of patrons discovering our digital collections for the first time because they were stuck at home. Maybe they couldn't get to the library, and they discovered the fact that we have a ton of ebooks. So, if you have an ebook habit and you're downloading on Amazon or your Kindle or Audible, that could be an expensive habit. And we have literally hundreds of thousands of selections. So Libby is an app that you can download. It's through a vendor called Overdrive that the library subscribes to. And we pick all of the ebooks and all of the audiobooks on that service that's curated by our librarians. And you download the app. So whatever your app store is on your mobile device, you download Libby. It'll ask you what's your local library. You put in Darien Library. It'll ask you for your barcode from your library card, and then that's your passport. And you will get access to hundreds of thousands of amazing ebooks and materials that you can download with the click of a button. You can also place holds on them. And the fun thing about the ebooks and e-materials, there are no late fees. They just, they do expire when they're over, when they're due. They'll disappear off your device, but no late fees at all.
Do you get charged by the use of those books by your patrons, or is it a flat rate?
So it kind of depends on the vendor. Librarians have been in a little bit of a struggle with some of the ebook publishers for many years now, trying to get better terms of service. So, for example, the retail price of, let's say, a new ebook that comes out on the market for a consumer might be $20. The library is probably going to be charged somewhere in the realm of $60, and it might not last forever. It might expire after a certain period of time. The publishers, their perspective is, well, a physical book that the library used to purchase will eventually fall apart, and you'll have to replace it if you want another one. So they'll get another sale. With an ebook, it can go on forever and ever. And so they're, in the publisher's minds, they're losing money. And so they kind of jack up the prices given that reality, which, I understand. But it depends on the publisher. Some publishers, like you said, will charge by use. So the Hoopla app, which is another app that we subscribe to, you can download ebooks. You can even download TV shows and movies, music, but you do get a limited number of downloads as a patron every month. And that's because we have set limits on, how much we as a library can afford because it is a per use sort of model. So one thing that we've been doing sort of nationally, advocating, the American Library Association and other organizations have been advocating for a long time to compromise with some of these publishers, to find a middle ground between, them having a viable business model that makes sense for the library market, with the understanding that public libraries, want to give the best to to our patrons. We want to have these materials available, but, we need to have a pricing model that is reasonable for us as well.
You also mentioned that, whoever walks through the door of the library is going to be welcomed. You don't even have to show a library card, do you?
That's right. Yep.
Nor do you have to show or prove that you're a Darien resident. And do you get a lot of people coming from other towns because we have such a magnificent library? And are Darien taxpayers subsidizing people from Norwalk and Stamford and New Canaan using our library? You hear this question every year at budget cycle, I'm sure.
So about a quarter of our patronage are non-residents, and primarily people from Stamford, Norwalk, the surrounding communities, because as you said, we are a destination and we do have a beautiful library that people want to come to. So about a quarter of our card holders and a quarter of the foot traffic and things like that every day are non-residents. But we do get reimbursed from the state of Connecticut. So every year we report back our statistics in terms of how much non-resident usage we have and how many materials we circulate and offer to non-Darien residents. And the state has a very complex calculation where they compare each library to every other library in the state, and then reimburse using a formula to say, okay, how much do you get back? And that money also comes into our budget so we can do things like buy books and materials and provide programming and technology and things back for our community. And we have, at least for the last decade, I think been, one of the highest performing libraries in the state in terms of non-resident traffic. And that is about a quarter of our usage. There are some things that only residents get to do, though. I talked about some of the things that we circulate, not books, but devices, technology, things of that nature. Some of our programs, so for example, the story times, sometimes we have registered story times because they're so popular. Things like that are restricted to Darien residents only, or friends of the library who donate at a certain level and above. So, we do try to balance this need and this desire to be open and welcoming and inclusive with the understanding that if you are a Darien resident, a Darien taxpayer, you do get certain privileges and you do get entitled to certain things that a non-resident does not. And if they want those things, then they do need to become a friend at that higher level.
And do any of the non-residents who use the library become friends and donors?
Indeed. So one of the special privileges is our Bloomberg terminal, for example. That is something that is unique to many public libraries and is very in demand and popular. We have a user who specifically became a friend of the library because he wanted to use the Bloomberg on a regular basis. And, it's a win-win for both us and that individual. So yes, people do become friends. The other thing that's restricted to residents only are the digital collection. So what we were talking about a few minutes ago, all of the ebooks, all of the databases and the e-materials, those are restricted through your barcode. So you do need to be a Darien resident with a Darien Library barcode in order to access that material. And the only exception is if you are a friend of the library at that level, then you will get a Darien Library card and be able to access the ebooks.
What's that Bloomberg terminal cost? It's really expensive every month. It's like
Yeah,
$1,500 a month or
at
something.
least, yeah, it's in the neighborhood of $30,000 a year. It's an expensive piece of equipment and it's funded by the Friends of the Library.
Wow, great. Um, Before we wrap up, I want to talk about some of the other things that you do. You mentioned the community room and some of the events that you hold. Um, you're more than just books and DVDs, et cetera. You're also lectures and presentations. Um, Gil Harrell, who comes to you from, I think it's Naugatuck Community
Yes.
College,
Mhm.
has done standing room only lectures for the past couple of years about all kinds of classical music, etc. How do you find these people? How do they get booked? What are you looking for in terms of these kind of presentations?
For that, I have to say, Pat Sheary, who's the head of our adult programming department, and also Samantha Cardone, who does programming, oversees programming for the youth team. They're just brilliant at what they do, and they spend a lot of time looking around to see like what the zeitgeist is. What are people buzzing about in the community, and how do we as an institution respond to that in ways that are unique and different. Our mission is to educate, inform, and entertain. So, ideally, we're looking for programs that, kind of do a little bit of each. We want to be educational, absolutely. We want to be informative, but we want people to have a good time. So we're trying to find a mix of, academics. Sometimes we'll have, people from local colleges, professors, scholars. Other times we'll do more cultural programming that might be music. We had a great music program a couple of weeks ago, literally shut down the library to host it. Everything from classical to blues to rock and roll. Live performances are always a big hit here. And our librarians, really keep their finger on the pulse of, publishing, obviously, and authors. So we try to get not just big name, popular authors, but try to find those, up and coming debut authors who haven't quite hit it big yet, but we know they're going to be the next big thing, and scoop in and get them early here. And also a lot of classes. We do tons of, small group workshops. During the pandemic, one of the most popular Zoom programs that we were doing were home base, cooking and gardening or flower arranging or crafts at home for different ages, all across the spectrum. And those continue to be really popular here as well, home decor, things like that. And technology education. We've just restarted our one-on-one tech program. So you can come in, book a librarian, book an hour or two with one of our specialists and sit down, whether it's a computer, a device, you need help navigating, how to use Facebook or how to use Excel or just how to, do basic, computer 101. You can just sit with that person next to them and go through it together, which is, I think really the best kind of learning.
Well, full disclosure, I have been lucky enough to be invited to do presentations to the library about some of my passion about transportation. I think there's another one coming up in a few months.
That's right.
I do these pro bono, obviously. I imagine you give some sort of compensation to some of these presenters, maybe not to the authors because they're basically trying to
Right.
move the merch, sell their books, etc. But that comes from the Friends of the Library as well, too.
Absolutely. So if we're lucky, we get an author on tour. So like you're saying, we don't have to pay them because they're promoting a book. Sometimes though, if we want to bring an author and they're not on tour, they might have an honorarium. And a lot of our guest lecturers, if they're not as kind to do it pro bono as you are, Jim, they do have an honorarium or a fee associated. So yes, all of that, whether it's a dance troupe, an a cappella group, a lecturer or a panel discussion, all of that gets funded through the Friends of the Library, yes.
And a lot of those presentations, either in the community room or done on a platform like this on Zoom, which allows you to bring in people from across the country, fascinating presentations. They're archived on your own television website, darienlibrary.tv. which you have been gracious enough to share with TV 79. So you'll see quite a few of those presentations on Darien TV 79, with appropriate thanks and credit to the library as well too. Do those presentations get a lot of views after they've been done live? Do people go back and look at them?
Yeah, it really is. It's one of, people sometimes ask, what's a hidden gem of Darien Library? I always say that our TV channel, because it really is a treasure trove of content, new programs, whether they're in person or on Zoom, and also historical. I mean, there are some really great videos that we've archived from our own archive and got them up on the channel there. It's one of my favorite things, and we are proud to say that we do get a fair bit of views. In fact, I think it was last year, Amanda Goodman, who's our head of technology and user experience, she ran the numbers and she compared us to some other very large public library systems, including, for example, New York Public Library, Chicago Public Library, I mean, big systems. And she said, our numbers and our views on our YouTube channel, on the TV channel, are higher. We get more views than some of these really big institutions. Nothing against, Chicago or NYPL, but I think it's pretty neat that little old Darien Library was outperforming them with some of our views and engagement there.
I think there's one about how to write a screenplay, which has had hundreds of thousands of views.
Yeah, exactly.
It keeps getting discovered. I'm sure YouTube algorithms keep presenting it up as the definitive work as well too. The more people watch something, the more people will be invited to watch something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kiera Parrott, our guest today, she's the director of the Darien Library, and I don't want to keep you from your appointed rounds much longer, but let's wrap up by talking a little bit about the future, what your vision is, what you'd like to do in the coming years.
Yeah, coming aboard as I did in, the middle of 2020 was, challenging to say the least during the pandemic. And, I think one of the big things we're focused on is really welcoming people back. We have seen, as everyone else has, decline from 2019, 2020 in terms of just foot traffic and people here. And, we're on the upswing again. We're starting to really see people come back in full force to the building every day. We're getting louder and buzzier and more excitement here at the library, which is beautiful to see. But we still have, a way to go to see, where we were prior to the pandemic in 2018, early 2019. And one of the things that we know is a lot of new families have come to Darien in those ensuing years. A lot of new families in town. And so one of my main priorities is making sure that they know that we're here, and that we really are an amazing resource, and that the library is for them, whether you have young children, you want to come to some of the programs and events, little readers, or you're looking for a quiet space to work remotely and you need a meeting space, or you're just looking, to meet some people and get together and be together again. So that's a big priority for me. And especially people who move from other towns and cities who may think they know what a public library is, but they haven't seen anything yet. Come to Darien Library, let us give you the grand tour. Let us show you what we have to offer. So that's, I think, a big part of what we're focused on in the next year or so is welcoming people, welcoming them back, not taking for granted that people know how special this place is.
Well, I remember times where we had ice storms and power outages, and the Darien Library kept the juice on, and you would put out power strips, and there would be hundreds of people in there basically charging their phones and their laptops, etc. Also, you should be so proud of the fact that your internet is, I believe it's what's known as a T1 line.
That's right.
It is a piece of pipe about this big. It's extraordinarily fast, and your Wi-Fi, you don't limit to the building, you pipe it to the outside. So there are actually people, even when the library is closed, who are sitting in the outdoor tables and logging on and doing whatever it is they need to do.
Almost every morning when I get to work before the library opens, there's at least one or two folks sitting on their laptop out in the courtyard. Yeah, which is wonderful. I mean, that's the type of thing we want to be here for. The other thing is over the last couple of years, we've seen obviously a lot of division, a lot of challenging times for people personally, professionally. We're living in tough times, and people are increasingly isolated, lonely. There's a lot of sadness and anxiety out in the world. And one of the things I remember hearing from one of our patrons a couple of years ago was, the library is my happy place. When I walk through the doors, my shoulders go down. It's like, oh, it's I can relax. It's that sort of place and feeling. And that's really what we want to continue to be. We want to be your happy place here.
Speaking of happy place, are you going to have any more of your Friday afternoon cocktail parties?
Oh, yeah. So that's also been a sort of a COVID, I guess, invention. Is we thought, we have this beautiful courtyard. We want people to come together. We need more social events that just kind of get people, being together again. So yes, cocktails in the courtyard, light refreshments. Usually at each event, we would fet one of our local nonprofit partners and just kind of have like a fun community celebration. So they have been enormously popular. I'm in talks with Pat Sherry to see if and when we can do one before the weather turns too cool again. But yes, they've been really fantastic. And you meet, residents who've been here many, many years and families who just moved to town a few months ago. It really is that perfect combination.
Well, I invited a friend of mine to one of Gil Harrell's lectures on Bach's cantatas. And he was embarrassed to admit, even though he's lived in this town for 6 years, he had never been in the library. But I think he will be back again. It is such a gift to the community. Kiera Parrott, our guest today on Community Matters. She is the director of the Darien Library. Go down to the library. Say thank you to the librarians for all they do. And if I may be so bold, think about considering making a donation to the Friends of the Library to keep all this going. Kiera, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you, our faithful viewers, for watching another edition of Community Matters.